Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Richest Men in Town podcast. I'm Mike Freeman, and along with my good friend and co-host Tyler Gould, we're excited to welcome you to our little podcast project. Tyler and I are just a couple of middle-aged husbands and dads driven to live our best lives. We want to be better every day, so here we'll be sitting down with great people. Not famous people, but great people that we admire, to learn their secret to living the rich life. Probably not the rich life you're thinking of. Our guests come in humbled and surprised at the invitation and hopefully leave feeling proud and grateful, realizing just how good they really have it. So pull up a chair, stay a while, and raise a glass with us as we toast our guests to the richest men in town.
Mike Freeman, another episode of Richest Men in Town is in the books tonight. We had a great time with Justin Queen, a friend of yours, who I feel honored to have met tonight. Tell me what stood out to you tonight.
Man, Tyler Gould, you think you know a guy, right? Had an opportunity to work side by side with Justin Queen, doing some great things back in the day at a previous job. And a great guy, he reaches out to me one day out of the blue, tuning into our podcast, friend of Derek Anderson. Shout out to Derek Anderson, episode 73, I think. So going back a little bit. And he indicates that he's doing some work. And I was just like, you know what? Let's hop in. Let's talk about it. And you think you know a guy, spend a couple hours in this format, and you get to walk a little bit. You get to walk a couple miles in his boots, and you get to feel the load that maybe he and so many others, right? How many others are carrying burdens that are just, they're heavy. And Justin lets us in on that process, man. It's powerful.
Yeah, he talks about some of the struggles that he had as a child, and he talks about his experience in combat, and how some of those things have impacted his life. And then, but one of the things I loved about Justin, and there's a lot, is his desire to look at himself, take an assessment, and say, what do I have to do to move forward in a better direction or a different direction? And man, it's inspiring. It really is, Mike.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a point where he's talking a little bit about, just brutal reality of life as a soldier in the U.S. Army. Shout out to all of those that are serving. He talks about some of the pains that he goes through. And when he comes back, there's this kind of a shallow joy that he feels, and the troubles and challenges felt buried and far away.
Yeah.
But they weren't.
Right.
And to folks that have things that they're trying to bury, for folks that have trauma that is undealt with, right? That we just haven't done work on ourselves, it can feel buried and far away. But I think the message I'm taking away from Justin is, man, let's do work. Let's talk to people. Let's let some people in. Let's let some people in that might know a few things that can help us, so that we can truly stand at a place where we said, okay, I'm past that, right? I've overcome that, or I'm in the process of overcoming that, where I can stand like a Justin Queen and I can say, hey, that thing that I went through, that doesn't define me.
Yeah, I
am not the problem.
Yeah, the words that really just ring in my head is, redemption's around the corner. And Justin believes that, and he lives his life that way, and he is doing everything he can to help other people understand that as well. And
he can see it.
And he can see it.
He can see it in other people.
Right. And so I think, it was a unique conversation with Justin, and I hope that our listeners around the world will listen to Justin's words and feel inspired to make changes in their own lives, but also to help other people find the courage and the energy to make changes in their lives as well.
Yeah. And hey, trauma, Justin's load is unique, but then again, it isn't.
Right.
So people listening to Justin's story are going to hear some things that might just smack them upside the head.
Yeah.
And kind of hopefully wake us all up.
Yeah.
Wake us all up to the things that we can do each and every day with the gifts that have been given to us to be authentic, right? To be ourselves and be that person that that God needs us to be, especially in the lives of our loved ones and other people that are along our path. So shout out to Justin Queen. Love
Absolutely. It. So look, if you're looking for an excuse to be inspired by someone's life, you found it right here. Justin Queen is an inspiring guy. He's got a lot of great things to say. I hope our listeners listen hard and listen deep to what Justin's saying and enjoy your time with Justin Queen on The Richest Men in Town.
Well, in the spirit of, we talked about 90 days and cold water challenges. My daughter informed me that the next time I talk to her, we will be at 100 days left of remission. Yeah, she's not counting. She's not tracking. She's got something on her phone, and her phone tells her, where she's at.
Yeah.
And I just thought 100-day challenge, right?
So what are you doing?
I don't know, but maybe this is an opportunity for me to say 100 days from now, I'm going to be a different person. What is that different person going to be? But here's the thing. Friends of the program are going to say, wait a minute, Mike, I've seen this movie before. I've heard you talk about this. I've heard you talk about that, right? I've heard you talk about, and I got no stick with itness.
Well, let's do this. I'm in on this 100 days. What do we got?
No stick with itness. All right. 100-day challenge.
Yeah. Where are we at? What are we doing? I'm in. I'm all in.
Okay, but it's got to be something legit, right?
Yeah, we could do anything for 100 days.
We can do anything for 100 days, and it would need to be significant so that when she gets off the airplane, she's going to be like, whoa, Dad, you're different. I'm going to say, 100-day challenge.
I mean, all right, maybe we need to give this some thought because I don't want to shoot from the hip here and all of a sudden we're trying to grow beards for 100 days, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think 100-day challenge, it can be a pretty amazing opportunity because 100 days feels pretty significant.
It does. Right? I like it.
And you could really do something but if you come across lame, like I even think like 100 days of like no soda, that's kind of lame.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be kind of a moonshot. I don't know.
I think it needs to be something that gives you a noticeable change, right? Whether that's physically, spiritually, emotionally, whatever that is, it's got to be noticeable, right?
Yeah.
And so,
so we're going to spend a couple hours talking to a friend of mine. Justin Queen is on the episode tonight, and I'm excited to connect you with him. I'm excited for you to get to know him a little bit. This is unlike anything we've ever done, Tyler. And I know we've been there. We've said that, and our listeners in Tanzania are going to be like, what are you talking about? Every week you say we're going places we've never gone. Here's the backstory on Justin Queen. And I think he's going to be cool with me sharing this. He's a good friend of Derek Anderson, right?
Yeah. Episode, I'm not sure.
Shout out
a while ago.
Shout out to our boy, Derek Anderson. And I used to work with Justin Queen, right?
Yeah.
So Justin Queen is doing work like Richest Men in Town style work, where he's looking at his life. He's owning some stuff and he's thinking, I want to be better. He actually goes a step further and says, hey, I've been hanging out with my boy, Derek Anderson. Derek Anderson, episode 73, a new shot at being the best me. Very appropriate to our 100-day challenge spirit, right? But he reaches out to him. He's like, hey, I listened to Derek's episode. I've been hanging out with Derek. I've been listening to your other episodes. And I just want to come at you, Mike. And I want to let you know, hey, that time we worked together, I wasn't at my best self.
I like it, man.
Right. And I was like, whoa, all right. And he's like, I'm doing work. And I was like, how about you come on the podcast and let's talk about that work? And
now here he is.
And here we are. Right?
I'm really excited about this, Mike. I'm excited to get to know Justin. And I'm excited to know kind of what the genesis of this journey is. And what we talk about 100-day challenge, right? At the end, we want to see something noticeable. What's the noticeable changes that Justin wants to see in his own life?
Yeah,
because I'm fired up, man. Let's do it.
Let's let this guy in. What do you say?
Let's do it. Let's kick the doors in.
I'm excited to see him because it's been a little bit, right? It's been a little bit. He's been waiting in the waiting room, man. That guy's patient. I mean, we're talking Tyler and I are just rambling.
But the good news is the waiting room is stocked with some good food. There's stuff in there, man. So,
Justin Queen, welcome to the richest man in town, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm good. Good to see you. Good to see you. Hey, Justin, Tyler, Justin.
Justin, good to meet you, my friend.
So, Justin, we've been rambling, as you can imagine, because you've been in the waiting room for a little bit. We've been all over the place talking.
Soapy ears.
Seriously,
we're all over the place, man.
We warned you, right? In the pre-show doc, we talk a little bit about this being the wild card portion of the program where you don't even know what you're coming in on. But we've been talking a little bit about throwing away our barbecues, right? We've been talking about cold showers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then cold showers gets us talking about soapy ears, gets us talking about Southern Californian people taking all Northern Californian water.
And we're grateful for that.
Yeah,
right?
we don't need to get into that. Got us into some guys' prom hacks and what we used to do as a young, poor person and trying to impress the ladies. I don't know, Justin, if you went to your prom. Did you go to your prom?
I did not.
Hey, I didn't go either. We outnumber you, Tyler. We outnumber you.
Yeah. Justin, did you ever take flowers off of a grave site for a young woman?
I most certainly did not.
Okay. All right. Just checking. Hey, Mike, we outnumber you on that one.
Hold on, Justin. Does that strike you as wrong or criminal or unethical in any way?
Not necessarily. I just wonder what you're doing at a gravesite for flowers.
That's true. Justin, there's a lot of questions that come from that conversation.
Hey, it's resourceful, right? It's resourceful. Somebody's going to be listening to this and be like, I knew that Mike Freeman was a genius. I knew it.
Yeah, there's going to be a rash of flower thievery through cemeteries throughout the world right now. But,
hey, the key is to drive through and look for the green canopy shade, right? Because that's where
the fresh ones are.
That's where
Unreal.
You say it like that. It puts it in a little different context. Okay. So Justin, here's where we left it, right? The 90-day shower or the cold shower turned into a conversation about a 90-day movement. There is this 90-day cold shower thing that I saw on social media, and that got us thinking 100 days to a better me. 100-day challenge. And that led us into our interaction when you reached out to me on Facebook and said, hey, I'm a fan of the program. I'm a friend of Derek Anderson. Shout out to Derek. Hopefully Derek's doing well.
We love Derek. Absolutely.
We loved our time with Derek. And you've been hanging out, listening to the podcast and doing some work. And you reached out to me saying, hey, I wasn't my best me and I'm working. I'm like, well, let's get on the program and let's talk. Right.
Yep.
So that's what lands us here. And we've got a couple of hours to get into this, to get into what does this work look like in Justin Queen's life. So I'm excited for the opportunity. I'm excited that you reached out to me. But as you think about the noticeable changes that you're trying to make in your life, talk to me about what that looks like, because I'm looking for a 100-day challenge to a better me.
Okay. So basically, when I came back from the war, there was a real transition in life to try to fit back into a normal way of being. And for a long time, I kind of struggled with that. So then as time went by, like I just kind of felt like I got it more under control and started feeling more normal. But in that, it was like kind of denying some of how it was still affecting me and how that was affecting relationships with friends and family. So it was kind of a realization that, you know, especially with my father getting sick last year, I really started to think about like how temporary life is, and just started stepping into things in a different way than I have most of my life. Like I've always been kind of a guarded person and I keep really private. And in that, like, I don't make myself vulnerable in relationships with, you know, coworkers, friends, family. Like they see a part of me, but I don't always step fully into that. So I started a different journey of looking back at my childhood and then kind of realizing that like the stuff that served to keep me safe when I was a kid isn't serving me in my adult life. And I started having to like take, a hard look at myself and say, what parts of my life are from the trauma of my childhood, and what do I need to change to move past that to become a healthier person?
Wow. I'm curious, Justin. I appreciate you sharing that. What that assessment process looks like. I mean, when you're looking at the experiences you had as a young child or a young man, how are you connecting the dots with those experiences to where you are when you started thinking about, I need to make some changes?
Well, so like when I was a kid, I never really lived anywhere for a long period of time. Like, we would live in a home for 3, maybe 6 months at the longest. And so we would move pretty much all over the Bay Area. And so as a child, I kind of learned that like vulnerability was a risk to myself, and making those connections with friends would just ultimately lead to pain, because then I'd get close to someone and then 3 to 6 months later, we'd move away. I'd lose touch or contact with them. So it just eventually became this thing where I could be friends with people on the surface, but I wouldn't let it go to a certain point, because keeping that distance is what kept me from feeling that disappointment or set me up for the fall of that relationship. I mean, I know it sounds like in that moment as a young boy, that was a conscious decision, right? Like, I'm not going to let people get close. As you're getting older and you're establishing other relationships and maybe more long-term relationships, right, with people, is that still a conscious choice, or is that just something that happens? I think it is some part of you that makes it a conscious choice. But I think it becomes so natural to your interactions that you sort of lose sight of you're actually even doing it.
Yeah.
And so, you start to basically do it easier and easier to where you can maintain friendships, but more on a casual level. And you stop realizing that you're not stepping into the full experience of being vulnerable with people. There's definitely been people that I've allowed that in my life, but I keep that to a very small circle versus
just letting everybody into that space. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you stepping on a podcast, right? Because you talked a little bit about being private and guarded and that vulnerability. And I appreciate too, when you reached out to me, that felt vulnerable, but it felt powerful. Yeah. Right. When we are vulnerable and we're real and we're authentic, it's powerful. It's powerful. And I walked away from that exchange, even thinking about my relationship with you, our time together, and what kind of person I even want to be, right? But I'm wondering too, like, you get into these patterns or you get into these habits, as you say, growing up as a kid, you had these things almost as a protective measure. As you get older, it solidifies into kind of who you become. What feedback or what event triggered maybe this idea of, I got to change some things?
So it's kind of a couple things. Like, when I came back from the war, I had been married.
Let's talk a little bit about that, right? So what branch of service, where are we at?
So I was in the Army. I served for a little over 13 years, traveled kind of all over the world, stationed in Germany, lived in Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia.
Hold on, back up. We had some audio. There's like
a little glitch in the audio, but we're good now. We're good.
13 years.
13 years, Germany, Texas, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Southern California. I did almost 2 years in Iraq. Most of my service was good. It was something that I knew I'd wanted to do since I was about 3 years old. And my entire family has served in the military, as far back as we can trace it, really. So there's definitely like a legacy there and a calling to do so. And with how chaotic my childhood was, the Army gave me a sense of purpose and order and discipline that I had never experienced in my life. So it felt like the structure that I had been missing my whole life. And, so when I went to the war, when 9/11 happened, basically it changed kind of the entire world. I remember the exact moment I saw, the planes and all that crashing into the towers. And I just knew from that point on that life would be different for me and for several people that I knew. And so, not long after, I started watching my friends start to get deployed to Afghanistan. The pressures on people in the military definitely got greater at that point because, the amount of people being moved all across the world in a war that we had never prepared for. So you would get 3 months home and then, 12 months out, and then 3 months home and then 12 months out, multiple deployments, things like that. And then they picked up and started the Iraqi war, which, then we were doing 2 wars simultaneously. So that strain got like incredibly difficult. And it wasn't a pleasant experience in that there weren't boundaries. Like, when we kind of imagine war, I think in a general sense, a lot of us, you think that it's people in uniform fighting in very specific ways, but that's not really how war was. It was very messy. You didn't always know who was your enemy and who was your friend. So there was a lot of trauma created from that circumstance because the same people that you would have relationships that were the locals over there might be friends with you for, a month to 3 months. And then that might be the same people that you were engaging in combat, shortly thereafter or turning on you at inopportune times. And so that was a really life-changing experience. And to see the way that other places live was very difficult. Like the very first moment when we made movement into the country in the early parts of the war, probably about the first 20 miles was just lined with children, no parents, just like basically lined across the road begging for food and water. And just absolutely heartbreaking because then you could, I was a young father at that point. I could picture my own kids living in that same culture, same style of life. And, you empathize, but you also have a mission, so you can't stop and make the world better. So even in the first stages of it, that was really heartbreaking. And then, you saw a lot of stuff as the war, evolved. Basically, like, Bush at the time, I think, declaring the war to be over. And then that's really when the war started, not when it ended. And things got, pretty bad for a period of time. Just handling combat. I was a medic through the war. So, dealing with patients, both civilian and military. And we lost people. And some of those moments, really carried into my life.
So, number one, thank you for your service, right? And I love that idea of family legacy and that calling. And I think the calling is one thing, but when you dedicate 13 years of your life to service, that's, I think that goes above and beyond. And I'm not pointing blame. I'm not pointing blame at our armed forces. And maybe we didn't know, right? Did you feel like the Army was aware of the impact of trauma and was providing you support and services to help you through that trauma?
So that's a very good question. And I think while you're in service and you're surrounded by, the brotherhood that you are, you're in a better place. Because like in the suffering that you share together, the bond that you form with your brothers in arms is something that like I can't even explain.
Those are the people that can understand perfectly.
Right. Well, yeah. Even aside from that, like you bond in such an extreme way that they become closer to you than, your own family. Mm-hmm. And most of those people I'm still absolutely connected to. And, it can be 5 years, it can be 10 years, but as soon as we're next to each other, it's that same bond, that same closeness that you just can't explain. But the military prepares you on how to be reactive to situations, how to, return fire reactively, how to respond to engagements reactively. But they don't really teach you when you come back how you change. Because like you make consolations with yourself to be able to do the things that combat calls in you. And so you have to, suppress your empathy for people. You have to, if you have love for people in order to fight and possibly take life, you have to find a way to suppress that feeling. And so anger is usually one of those feelings and emotions that takes the place of love. And in the process of that, you think that like everything I'm doing in this moment can be turned off again. But when you get home, the reality is that it's much harder to resume the way you had lived life before.
Justin, I want to kind of bounce around here for a second, Mike, and maybe you can, if that's okay. I'd like to put a pin in that point of you coming home, and I'd like to back up for a second and talk a little bit about a little more, if you don't mind, about your childhood and kind of what that looked like growing up, and your experiences there that kind of helped shape you.
Okay.
Preparing you to be, to fulfill that lifelong desire to be in the military.
Okay.
Can you talk about what family was like, where you grew up? Do you have siblings? Can you kind of give us the backstory there a little bit?
Yeah. So, my childhood was pretty rough. When I was a kid, I was born at Fort Carson when my dad was in the service. And then we left Colorado to come to California. And my dad got out of the military a little bit after we got into California. And so the early part, from about 1 to 7 was a pretty normal childhood for me. We lived in the same house for that first 7 years. My parents' relationship was, not ideal, but the most stable that it probably ever was. And then right around the time that I was 7, both my parents lost their jobs with the phone company. I think it was Pac Bell, but it used to be called something else. I don't remember. But after they lost their jobs, the whole course of our lives changed. And we started to move around to different places. My parents' relationship deteriorated, or maybe I just became more aware of it. They fought constantly. They would scream and yell at each other and call each other names that, like, to me, still to this day, like, I can't fathom how people that love each other can treat each other in the ways that they did. They started to do drugs and things like that at that time. It started out with minor stuff, I mean, as much as drugs are minor, more like marijuana and things like that. And then just as we got older, the different drugs became more extreme. We moved into neighborhoods where, we were one of the only white families. So I grew up fighting a lot of the times when I was a little kid, because just got marked out for being like this little blonde hair, blue-eyed kid. And so like the violence that I saw around me was like a constant. Gangs were a big thing in the areas we lived in. And then we never had stability because, we would live places for 3 to 6 months. They would be fighting. We would get evicted from our homes. So the sheriffs would come and move us from one place or another. There were periods of times where we were homeless and we would stay like in hotels or things like that for periods of time. And we would constantly shift between family homes to live with like my aunt or my uncle or my grandparents. And so that was pretty much my whole childhood until finally I got to be about 16 and I finally just couldn't take it anymore. And I moved out, started working illegally under the table. And from that point on, I just kind of made a promise to myself that my kids would never live the life that I lived. Met my first wife at that period of time, I think when I was 15. We had our daughter when I was 18. And then I joined the Army at 19.
What's her name?
My daughter, Aislinn.
Aislinn.
Yeah.
So your daughter's born when you're 18 and you joined the Army when you're 19?
Yep.
Okay.
And honestly, like, there were some things in between that period of time. Like I was stabbed when I was 14. It's a big part of why my parents moved us up here to the Northern California. They were trying. I mean, my parents, they were good people, but they were just doing, the best that they could, I guess. But they served for me as an example of what I wasn't willing to live my life like.
So as a young boy, I mean, it's interesting as you're talking about these experiences. You've got these vivid memories as a young boy of some of these experiences. What are those? What are your takeaways? What are you feeling as you're recollecting this? Are these things like, hey, this is going to drive me to be different, or did you feel sort of trapped in that world right there?
So it's a little bit of both. It definitely has made me a driven person to be successful and to be where I'm at today versus where my childhood was and where I grew up. Like, I mean, I have 2 brothers. We slept in like the same bed because we usually shared a room. We shared clothes because we didn't have much in the way of, those kinds of things. So there's a lot of shame and guilt from that period of time. And for like the longest time as a kid, I felt like all of the stuff that my parents were going through was because of me. And so there was an association with that. And there was also a way that other families at that time treated me. Even though like I was pretty much like the straight and narrow kid, like I never did the drugs, I never did the gang stuff. But a lot of my friends were starting to do drugs and things like that. And I was always the one trying to give them a different way and to teach them a different lifestyle, even though that was the lifestyle I was living in. And so
where can I stop there? Where did that come from, you think?
Where did me trying to give them an alternative way?
Yeah, when everything around you is one way, where does this desire, where does this drive to not do it that way come from?
There were 2 things really. One was like feeling so out of control. That was the only control I had, was to choose how I could live my life. regardless of the situation around me. And the second was kind of like I always felt spiritual. And so like when things would get really rough, I would oftentimes sneak out of my home. Well, not really sneak, but my dad wasn't necessarily faith-based. My mom was. So I always felt like I had to hide my spirituality from my father, because I would hear from him, like, how Christians are hypocrites and things like that. And yet I felt called to that purpose. So I would often go to a Catholic church. And when my life felt out of control, the church felt like order and structure.
Do you remember like how old were you when you found yourself kind of visiting these churches and seeking out that structure or that order?
Well, from the time I was little, my mom used to take us to church till we were probably about 7 or 8. And then like I had always remembered how I felt when I went to church from that time. So, once I was like 10, it was kind of on me to pursue that on my own.
Wow.
And so, there were some people, like some deacons in my church that knew my situation, and like I was on the precipice of making like bad decisions and choosing to live my life in a good way or a bad way, that someone always stepped into my life. So someone would always step into my life at like these critical moments where like I felt like my life was about to go one way or the other. And, I've had this conversation with Derek Anderson, and like he said something to me in one of our discussions that really stuck out. He's like, people didn't step into your life, they were called into your life. And I truly do believe that.
Yeah, I like that.
Because when those people came in my life, they had no reason to step into my life to help me. At least in the sense that like, I didn't see myself as valuable or worthwhile at that time. And, when they stepped in, they really impacted my life in a positive way. And it was like a reaffirmation that like, God is always faithful and he's always calling me to a purpose.
When did you, at what point do you recognize the impact of these people that are coming in and out of your lives, that are making having a positive influence on you? Is it in the moment? Is it in hindsight as you look back? Are you kind of taking inventory of that?
I would say it's both.
Okay.
There are particular ones where like I remember some of the words that they spoke to me, but there's other ones that had much huger ramifications in my life. There was a man when I was 14, and gangs were like a big part of that. And at that period of time, like some of my friends were getting involved in some of the gang activity really heavily. And they were asking me to participate in it. And I was actually on my way to get involved in some things that probably would have saw my life change dramatically. And I probably would have went to jail or prison. And just out of the blue, this guy, Mario Smith, who to this day I'm still really close with, he just approached me for no reason. He's a black guy, and I was this little, thug kid that, he was a businessman, and I was, for whatever reason, he approached me and he just said, "Hey, what's going on in your life?" And, he's like, "I can see that something's going on with you." And he's like, "I own this business," which was a hobby store. And he's like, "Can you just come inside and I'll show you around, and, you can just hang out for a minute." And I was curious because like, there was a side of me that wanted those types of things, but like didn't really ever feel like that was the life I could live in. he just started talking to me in a way that I wasn't used to. Like, he wasn't talking to me like I was just some punk kid. He was talking to me like I was a person and an equal. And he gave me an opportunity to start working in his store. He's like, I know you're not, legal age or whatever. He's like, I can't necessarily pay you, but like, you can work and you can learn. And he gave me that opportunity. And like that, honestly, the example he started providing to me was like the example of a father and a brother at the same time that I had never experienced. And, he's a godly man, and he always provided for his children. And just that example has always stood with me.
It's almost like if I'm watching the movie of a young Justin Queen growing up, the audience would know exactly what Derek Anderson's referring to, right? You're going through it and you're like, man, Mario's got good timing. I was about to make a knucklehead mistake, right? But the audience watching the movie would be like, yeah, that's a God thing.
Yeah. And I honestly think it was like a shooting that was something that was going to happen at that day. And like, I never wanted that lifestyle, but I felt hopeless at that moment. And when Mario stepped in, that like changed the dynamic of my life, because it showed me that like I wasn't trapped in being that kid, and I always had a choice.
Well, I think can I really quick, you said hopeless in that moment, and I just want to highlight something. Michael Burke several episodes ago came on this program and taught us about hope. And when we have trauma in our lives that we're not dealing with, that robs us of hope, right? Yep. So we're in these situations where we feel powerless and we feel like a lack of control. And when we lose that hope, we lose our way, right? And we start walking down paths that we shouldn't be walking. We find ourselves in situations we should never, ever be in. And it's because of the trauma that's happening around your life. And luckily you've got somebody coming in and helping you and providing some of that direction, and probably helping you process some of that trauma that you were experiencing.
He kept giving me an avenue when things were bad in my life. Like, he didn't just step into that moment. He stepped into my life for years. And like, he invited me into his home with his children. And I think it was healing to both of us. Just learning to know one another, and it was a good example for me. So, it was an example that I hadn't had up till that point.
I don't know Mario. I love Mario. Thank you, Mario, for doing everything that you do for Justin. Who knows who else, right? But I bet you if you were to look into Mario's story, he could probably recognize and see himself in you, right? So he sees you walking down the street that day, and he may be thinking, right, I feel like I got to do something, and that's God intervening. But he may have also looked and been like, I've seen that look before.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's interesting too. I mean, Derek Anderson talks about people being called into your life, right? And he tells a story of a police officer that intervened in his life, right?
Yeah, in a moment,
in a moment, right? That changed everything, and thank goodness.
Same exact story. He's
right.
walking, doing some things, and the police officer comes up. He's like, "Hey, change your ways, right?
Yeah,
change your ways."
Yeah, I think it's interesting though that there's I think if we all took inventory of the interactions we have in our lives, we'd find a lot more people or even moments with people, right? Maybe they're not year-long Mario Smith, interactions, but I think there's these moments. Derek Anderson's was a brief conversation with a police officer that changed lives.
Yeah.
And I love that thought. I'm a believer that stuff's not by accident. That
Well, I mean, come on, here it is. We're sitting here in springtime, right? But that's so George Bailey and It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah,
that's the definition of hinge moment, right? Where we have these experiences and these conversations, and even as Justin is is saying that, I bet you he could, go through and rattle off the conversations and the points and the times that maybe it was a one-time thing. And maybe in the case of like a Mario Smith, it was like, no, this guy just inserted himself into my life and became a father figure, became a brother figure. Right.
Yeah.
Justin, I got a question though. Growing up, I'm wondering what young Justin Queen dreamed about. Did you have dreams with everything that was going on around you? Especially from 7 on, it sounded like it was rough, right?
Yeah.
Did you have dreams? I know it sounded like military was part of the picture from way early on.
Yep.
But did you have any dreams as a kid?
I did, honestly. And there's one that like I vividly remember, and it also played a big part in my life. And that was when I was a young kid, like I had this vision of my life that was so different than the life that I was living at that time. And, I had a dream of being grown up and having this little blonde hair, blue-eyed girl. And in the dream, I kept referring to her as Dream. That was the name. And when my daughter was born, we named her Aislinn, and Aislinn means dream in Gaelic.
Cool.
Come on, right?
It's the realization of that vision of when I was a kid, like everything that I could have imagined in that moment, seeing my daughter for her first moment was like the greatest blessing I had ever received. And I felt so overwhelmed in that moment too, like trying to look at her and be like, I'm responsible for this. How am I ever going to do this? And like, that's where I really kind of made that commitment in my life to just my children, my life would never be what I grew up in. They would never have to come home and wonder if the sheriff was kicking us out, whether we would have food, whether we would have power. And I just really like ambition knew no bounds at that point when my daughter was born.
I'm curious, Justin, if we can maybe get up to the point where you're a young father, right? You've met your first wife, you're a young father. How do you navigate that, right? Because I think that when we become fathers, right, for the first time, Mike, right, we become fathers, we're immediately calling on the things that we've experienced, right? And we're looking at those things and we're going, okay, this is how the people I was around did it.
You're running a filter, right?
No, I don't think so. You're like survival mode a little bit, right? And it's just like picking the things that you saw. You're discarding some things, maybe consciously. You're like, I don't want that. But I'm curious, like, how does that look coming through the trauma that you've been through? You're a young married man.
What do you grab?
What do you grab, man?
That part actually came really naturally to me. I think like when I met my first wife, we had very similar childhoods. So in that we kind of bonded and we had a similar outlook that we didn't want that lifestyle for ourselves or for our children. And probably for the first time in my life, like I made myself truly vulnerable to another human being. And the blessings of being able to make myself completely vulnerable like that was like life-changing.
And so yet you're experiencing that on a limited scale, right? Because you're having those vulnerable experiences with your wife, but still outside in other relationships, you're closing that off. Is that right?
Yeah. Like, like I had friendships and stuff, but like I never let them truly into my world.
Right.
And then, it got that much worse when I stepped into the military, because then it was that same kind of thing. You're at a base for so long and then you're moved to another one. And so that just kind of became the norm.
Can you talk a little bit about being a father and serving in the military, right? I'm assuming there's some time away that had to have ripped your heart out.
Absolutely. That's some of the hardest things is like when me and my daughter, like that was like instant love. There was no work involved in that. And so, in the military, oftentimes you have to do field rotations and things like that, where you might be away 30 days. You might be, 3 months, depending on what you have to do. You might have to go to trainings that can take 3 to 6 months. You do a lot of like leadership schools and things like that. And so there's a lot of difficulty there in separation, and I think it's honestly harder on the family than it is on the soldier themselves, because we know what's going on when we're making those trips, what we're doing, our itinerary. The family's always wondering, like, when's my dad going to come back? Or the same thing with the wife. And sometimes you can talk about the things you're doing, and depending on what you're doing, sometimes you can't. So the hardship really falls to the spouses and to the children. It's hard for the father too, or the mother, whichever one is in the military, but you're also busy. Like you're doing stuff so much that you're distracted from some of it. And then it's like, this special celebration each time you come home, and it's like, it's overwhelming, like the love that you feel when you're gone, and then you just can't wait to get back to see them and be back with them. But that's like when you're in normal stuff. When you go to war, that's so much harder. Like with my daughter, I don't think I've ever experienced something as painful as the day that I was leaving to go to war. I was at the airport, and, my daughter knew that I'd be leaving. And as I started to walk towards the plane, my daughter completely lost it. And she ran to the window and was like pounding and screaming and crying. And the first airplane that I was getting on was a civilian one. So I had my gear, but I wasn't dressed in military uniform. And so getting onto the plane, having to walk away from my daughter in that state, I got to my seat and sat down, and I was just like bawling in a way that like was not normal for me, to be like around people that I didn't know and just openly weeping and knowing that it was going to be for a long time, if not forever.
I just want to stop right now and just think, Tyler, we've had veterans on the show, and every time I hear those stories, my heart's touched with the sacrifice of families, of soldiers, of laying down everything to serve your country in all of its flaws, right?
Yeah.
All of, we're flawed men and women. You're following orders. So many things are out of your control and choice, and yet you answer the call of duty to do the things that you've been asked to do for people that may not even honor and respect the thing you're doing. Yeah. Right. And so shout out to everybody. Yeah. Shout out to everybody who's living that sacrifice, because it rips my heart out, Justin, just hearing you share your account and your experience. So
yeah, that's a big deal.
It was so dramatic and sudden too. Like when I got the call to make movement, I was given 3 days notice. So I had to put my whole life in order, make sure that my wife was taken care of and provided for, and try to like make sure everything was lined up in 3 days while still trying to, spend as much time with my kids and get that last bond, because, when you're going to war, you really don't know.
Yeah.
The first thing is that you just don't know what you don't know about what it's going to be like, what you're going to see. And so there's that great unknown that just starts to overwhelm you while still trying to be strong and, put on that front for your family so that they don't see how scared and worried you are for what may come. And like, that's the ultimate thought that you go through is like, what will happen to my family if I don't come back?
But I mean, again, that is the enemy of vulnerability, right? Because all of those are fronts. Yep. All of those are walls. I can't let my family in on how scared I am. I mean, so you start to, again, condition yourself to be this way.
Right.
And this way is okay. It's not okay. It serves a purpose as a soldier heading off to war. But now, when we get into that life coming home, that's when the problem, right? That's when the problems hit and you realize something's broken here.
Yeah. That whole thing is interesting though, because if you just think from your perspective, Mike, right? You haven't served in the military, but there's moments in your life as a father where you are not going to tell your kids or your wife even everything that you're feeling right at that moment, because you feel like I've got to kind of protect everybody from what the storm that might be coming, right? And then I've definitely had those moments, right, where I've said, hey, you know what? It's not, everything's good. Nobody worry. It's rainbows and unicorns. On the flip side of that is I'm freaking out, right? But I think that the value of that moment maybe is later, right, when we can say to our kids or our spouse or what, hey, this is how I was feeling and this is what was going on. And I withheld because I wanted to protect you from that, right? But I think to your point, Mike, when we build those walls and we just let them stand, right? And it becomes we become this walled off character that doesn't have, that can lose the ability to kind of share, express, that shatters our ability to have deep connection, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, because what it does, I go to David Hill, right? It hardens that heart. And when that heart is hard, we're in trouble, right? Because hard hearts break.
Right. And
soft hearts are humble. Soft hearts are forgiving. Relationships, it's like that shock absorber in your life, and you can go through things. You can go through rough spots. You can experience some of these things. But when you harden that thing, watch out, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, David Hill said, vulnerability is the cornerstone of friendship, right? But vulnerability is the cornerstone of relationship, right? Regardless of who we're dealing with.
Right. I mean, right? Justin, you can probably relate to this more than anyone, but if you're laying next to your wife in bed and you're harboring stuff and she's laying there feeling like she's laying next to a stranger because you won't let her in.
Absolutely. Vulnerability is where love lies. Absolutely no question. And if you stop allowing yourself to be vulnerable, especially with those closest to you, you're going to destroy love. And it starts in small doses. Like, as a soldier, I can speak to it. Everybody has some level of it from trauma or experience, but, the withholding in ways that I had never done with my wife started in Iraq. And, we didn't have a phone call for the first 3 months because we were making progress into the country doing combat. So there was fighting and things like that. And so you didn't necessarily have the ability, like there wasn't, you didn't just stop at a store and call on a payphone or a cell phone. You didn't have any of that. So it took a while when we got to our first duty station that we started maintaining. And eventually they got like an internet cafe kind of a thing where you could make like a call maybe once a week, maybe once a month, depending on what was happening. And we would pick up the phone call after waiting in a line, and you'd have to do this at like 2 or 3 in the morning because the time difference. And you hope that your family's there, and you get the call and they start asking you how you're doing. And then you start getting attacked on the post because we would get like mortar fire and small arms fire and things like that. And they'd be like, what was that noise? And then you would be like, oh, someone fell down, but I got to go real quick. And you just like end your call. And like in your mind, you're protecting them from what's going on. But in retrospect, that wasn't the right thing to do, because it was changing the dynamic of a relationship that I worked so hard to build, where like there was this complete openness. Now all of a sudden I was keeping details, and that became kind of like a pattern, you know, like I'm protecting them, and that thought process carries on to everything, you know, like when you have those moments. Like there was a particular day in May of 2005, and we had a really bad attack on the post, and 3 of our people were killed, and like it devastated me. Like, I mean, I've treated people that have died before in both hospital environments, but like these were people that I knew, and one of them in particular that I was close to. And like it's really the start of a pattern of trauma that like I couldn't let go, and it changed my life that day. But speaking to my wife, anytime someone dies in your unit, basically they lock down all communication to your families. And that's so that the word of mouth doesn't spread what happened before the families are notified. And so like, you know, the families will know generally that someone was killed. They won't know who. So then like the families go into this trauma cycle of every strange car that's pulling up. Is this the notification that's coming? And, but then when, you know, I finally was able to talk to my wife, there was so much pain, and I was so devastated that like I couldn't let her into that. And you know, that carried on even after I came home. Like it felt so traumatic that you didn't want them to experience the pain you were going in, but they want to know.
Justin, can you talk? Let's kind of pick up where we put the pin in the original conversation. You know, you were coming back. Can you talk about sort of what that transition looks like for you, right? Yeah. And can you also talk about that, how that impacted your relationship and relationships in general?
Absolutely. And that's something that I feel very passionate about now. So the end of 2005, I actually got blown up by a mortar. So I got medevaced from there to Germany, from Germany to Virginia, and from Virginia to California, Travis Air Force Base. And I finally got to see my wife at that point. And that felt wonderful. Like, you know, like the trauma of war and all of the things that had happened felt buried and far away, because now, you know, you're back known for so long. And so when you first come home, there's like this celebration and jubilation that you're home, and everybody's like so excited to see you, and you're so excited to be home. You know, you start going to places like Round Table or any kind of thing that you've been denied, because like, you know, for 6 months, all we got was like a small serving of peas and carrots and a little piece of pork. That was like our meal, because everything was rationed. So now all of a sudden you have like the ability to go buy anything you want whenever you want. And so there's like this period of joy that happens, you know, everybody's celebrating you, and you're not thinking about where you've been or what you've done. And then there's about this 3-month window, is what I call it, where all of a sudden the magnitude of everything that you've done and been through just hits you like this overwhelming wave. And every emotion that you've denied yourself, every feeling of fear, every feeling of happiness or joy, everything all at once. So you have this overwhelmingness of emotions that hits you, and you're crying, and you're happy, then you're sad, and then you're angry, and you don't know why, and you're facing it alone. Because you can't tell everybody what's going on, because you can't even understand it yourself. And everything starts to change from that point on. Like you start to realize that you can't have conversations with the people who you used to be close to because they don't react to the conversations that you have the same. Like the questions come, everybody wants to ask, like, what did you see over there? What was it like? Did you kill people? Did you see people? Did you this, that? And you start to get so overwhelmed and angry because you don't want that question anymore. You don't want that inquiry into what's going on because they're seeing it from the perspective of curiosity and they want to know, but you're not seeing it the way they are. When they're asking you that question, that memory is coming back vividly. You're reliving those moments that you want to just forget. And so like you start to distance yourself from everybody that's close because you don't know how to fit in anymore. Your life is no longer the way it was before. You're not the way everyone else is. And so you feel really alienated and distant from everyone. And then like in that, like that avenue of closeness is gone. So then, you know, with your intimate life, there were so many nights where like I would sit there at night living those memories and having nightmares, and you know, a smell, a sight, a sound would trigger it to where I was back there. I wasn't home. I wasn't in the moment with my family. I was still living the war in my mind in a way I couldn't escape. And I would stare at my wife at night and want to tell her how those things had affected me and how, you know, everything that I was struggling with. And there's this guilt that kicks in where like, you're looking at your wife, you're looking at your children, and you're like, I love you more than my own life. But the only thing I can think about is I want to go back because I understand that life. I don't understand this anymore. And in that, like, you're destroying your family because they still love you the same, but their life is still the same. And you've evolved in a way where like you can't, at least for me, I can't say everybody, but you know, being in the levels of combat and things we saw, like it was so hard to be able to be like, you know, yeah, I'm okay, let's go to the park and play. And that's not what I was seeing. Like I was seeing the little children that I was treating that were, you know, 2nd-degree burns or amputations or, and you know, not to be gruesome, but a lot of the things that we saw, like I couldn't get those out of my mind. And my wife just would ask, like, you know, what's going on? Like, why are you mad at me? It was never about being angry with my wife or anything she ever did. When I saw like Father's Day or Mother's Day or Christmas or any of those things, I saw my friend Daniel Unger in his last moments dying over and over in my head. And I could just see his family and the sadness that existed in their life from the time he was lost. And I couldn't save him. So that's what would play in my mind. And that anger at myself that I couldn't do more, I couldn't save him, became like this thing that wounded my wife over and over. And I started to see myself as like this monster that was destroying his family. So I pushed my wife away. I pushed my kids away because I felt like I was protecting them by pushing them away from me because I felt like a monster. And that's a really hard thing to start to come to terms with because you don't feel any less love for those people than you did before. But the only way you can see yourself protecting them is to not be there with them.
Because you see yourself as the problem.
Absolutely.
Like you personalize it. It's not the trauma. It's not the mental health concerns. You personalize it.
It's you.
So that it's you.
Yeah. You can't, at that time, I couldn't see it as the trauma or the mental health side of it. I only saw it as myself.
Justin, what's the catalyst in your experience that took you from absorbing all of that, internalizing all that, and pushing people away to being able to say, hey, let me look at this from a different side and see how I can unpack this and be able to move forward? Was there someone, was there something, was there a moment, or is it just time heals that?
Time doesn't heal it at all. There were two moments that really were the catalyst for it. I was in such a place of darkness at that time, pushing my wife away and eventually leading to divorce, because I didn't recognize that I had a problem, that like I was different. Instead, it was like I'm protecting them and I'm pushing them away. And my mother-in-law at the time, her name's Sandra, she was the only person that recognized the trauma and the difference. And she called me out on it. And she's like, Justin, you need to get help. You're different. Something's hurting you, and I don't know what it is, but you need to get help. And the reaction to that is, I'm fine. I don't need this. Like, you don't know what's going on with me. But I love that woman to death. She basically wrote it out with me, even after the divorce. She's like, you can be angry at me, you can not like me, but you're still my son and I love you and I'm going to stick this out. And she would still show up to my house even after the divorce when the rest of the family treated me different. She never did, not once. And even though she made me very angry in the process, in retrospect, like, I love that woman and everything she tried to do for me. So that was the start of it, where I started recognizing it. But like a couple moments with my kids as well, and a moment with my wife that was like,
okay, kids. So we know Aislinn. Who else we got?
So my son, Jaden, at the time, so I think my daughter was 7 when I went to war. And I think my son was 3. And so when I came back, my daughter was almost 10 and my son was 5.
Gotcha.
So my daughter's the one who probably felt the effects of my changes the most, because when I left, I was this gentle and kind and empathetic man who just loved her to death. When I came back, I was this harsh and hard man that like spoke hard and reacted quickly instead of responding. Like the gentleness was gone. Like there was a part of me that I felt like died when I went to war, like an innocence that I might have possessed even through all the trauma I had faced as a kid. That went away. And where like I spoke softly to my wife, now I only spoke harshly and quickly in short summarized ways. And with my daughter, like when she would do things wrong, like I was so used to commanding men, and the difference between commanding people could be life or death. That carried over into my relationship with my children. Like, you can't disobey. This is important. And you stop seeing that like their life is their experience. So they've never seen these things, but like now all of a sudden you're like expecting them to be your soldiers. And kids aren't prepared for that. And so there was a moment where like, there were 2 things with my kids. One, my daughter had done something wrong at school. And so I took her outside and I had her do grass drills, which are like up, down, roll left, roll right. I think it might have even been raining and I made her do that in the grass. And like, it was uncalled for and it was way too extreme. And there was a part in that where like it definitely damaged my relationship with my daughter for a long time. And then with my son, he would run up to me, and when I would like start to say his name, he would flinch before I even spoke. And when I recognized that, that's when I knew there was something wrong. And I was like, I'm not this person. I'm not this man. And I don't want to be this man. Further past that was my divorce was like the counterbalance to how hopeless and dark I felt at that time, that like it hurt so much that it was the first thing that got through the darkness of how I felt inside, to be like, something needs to change. But that wasn't enough. None of those things were enough. And there was a moment after my divorce where I was sitting in my room and I took out a pistol and I almost took my own life because I felt like I would never be the man that I was when I left. And I felt so alone and just so distraught. But then I thought of my kids, and that's probably the one thing that kept me from doing it, is I didn't want to put that on their conscience. And so I started to change my life at that point, where I tried to get better. And I thought I did, because I was functioning and I was in, I was still working in a career, and I had went straight from the war and the horrible place that it is to working with kids in school. There's a functional side of you that knows you need to be this person to be successful and still carry on in society, even when you don't feel that inside.
Compartmentalize, right?
You compartmentalize, and you can be like, personable and happy in your public life where people see you and they interact with you. And then when you go home, all the burdens you're still carrying are still present, and it's a different world. And you also carry a presence too, where like, I think me and you had a conversation when you were the superintendent of Grant, where like when I stopped being conscious of how my presence can make other people feel, and I think I had like a bad day, something had happened, and I just went and talked to one of the teachers, and I didn't say anything wrong to them. I didn't treat them meanly, but I wasn't being overly concerned with how nice I was or how I approached them. And they got intimidated. And you're like, hey, Justin, sometimes like, some of the women can be a little intimidated when you come in the room and, say something. And like, I was like, okay, I got it. But like, wasn't because I was actually doing anything. It's just when you let that guard down, that part of you that is so used to being like super vigilant about everything around you, like that presence can carry into a room.
I'm curious, Justin. You're kind of at this point where you're starting to recognize that, hey, I got to make some changes. I got to do something different. But what does help look like? Like when you get to that point and you say, I got to make changes, and I'm assuming, because you've been making progress, right? You've been doing some changes, but when does it get to the point where you say, hey, I've got to make some real actionable changes here, and this is what they have to look like? And does that involve any other people stepping in and helping? Does that involve you seeking help? What does that look like?
So
and before you jump into that, I just want to kind of emphasize the scale of the problem. Like this has impacted relationships, personal relationships that you have, people that you've promised to love, right? That you've promised to be there. And I think that I want to highlight that word monster, because this feels like a huge monster. So I'm dying to know, how do you chip away at that, right? How do you overcome that? What does that help look like?
Right, because I think there's a lot of people that find themselves in the same situation as you, coming back from war. But I also think there's people that find themselves in situations where they know they need help, but to me, the miraculous thing is, right, there's been many times I've thought, man, I got to make some changes, and then I don't make the changes, right? So I think the miraculous thing is finding it and doing something about it. So I'm curious, what does that
but
look
it
like
could be
for you?
so overwhelming, right? Like we have
Yeah.
people, and the longer every day we go without doing it, it grows a life of its own. And it's like, I got this, it's not even a 500-pound gorilla on my back. This thing is all consuming. So like, talk to me about that bounce back.
So before we go there, I'll say, like, when I talk about Daniel Unger a lot. So he's the kid that was the moment of trauma that I couldn't escape. It was this never-ending vision of his death, and then a vision of his family and how much pain they must be going through to lose him. So he was a 19-year-old kid. He was like your all-American kid. He was the nicest human being I've ever met. You know, just always like this pure and genuine soul that like you were always happy to be around. He was a junior minister. He was a, black belt in martial arts. Just a good all-around kid. And when he died, I took that one very personal. And when a soldier dies in the war, it's not like when someone dies here in the civilian world, in that you don't get to take your time and mourn the loss of that friendship, of that, everything that they were as a person. Generally, like, you clean up the body, you compartmentalize it. The next day, there might be like a small formation with his boots and dog tags and weapon and helmet. And they call roll call. So they will call everybody's name in the platoon, and then they'll call the name of the person that's lost. And that's about it. And then you just go back to doing everything you had to do. So a lot of us didn't really process those losses. And I had written a letter a few days after his death to his father. And I carried that letter for 12 years everywhere I went. When I was at work, when I was at play, when I went on vacation, I carried that letter in my pocket always. And nobody knew that I carried that letter. And then I think it was 2014, I had dreaded that vision of sending that letter to his father because I almost couldn't bear it. And I was at Grant, I was in the server room, and I was just having like a moment where I couldn't get him off my mind. And I was just like, enough is enough. Like, you need to face this. And so I took that letter out, and I looked up his father's address, and I mailed the letter. And that was like one of the scariest things that I've ever done, because it was just a letter that basically said, I just want you to know that Daniel didn't die alone. People that cared about him were with him in his last moments. And I know it's not a consolation, but if I could trade places with him, I would do it. And I never expected to get a response. And it was within a day. His dad actually had called the state, found out my number, tracked me down, called me directly, and told me that they were doing the 10-year memorial service for Daniel, that they knew that a lot of us didn't get closure or get to, celebrate his life or mourn his death, and that he would like me to come down and visit for Daniel's memorial service. And I lost it. I broke down in a way I haven't broke down. I was so overwhelmed with fear, and I was like sick to my stomach, and I just didn't know how I could do that. For 10 years, I'd had this vision of his family condemning me with hatred and anger because I couldn't save their son. And now they wanted me to be there in person. So it was like 10 years of fear manifested to face that moment. And I felt like I owed it to Daniel to do it. So even though like everything in me was screaming to not go, to not face up to this, that I needed to do it for myself and for Daniel's family. Like if they had to vent their frustration, their anger, and their sadness, I would bear that cross. I would be that person that would bear that pain, even though I was terrified. And so I made the trip and met his family. And instead of this vision of 10 years of condemnation and anger and pain and hatred, his family embraced us with so much love and so much kindness and so much empathy. And like, I had seen Daniel die a million times in my head over and over, but I couldn't remember Daniel in life. And in that moment, for the first time, meeting his family and how they embraced us with so much love and so much kindness, I could see Daniel alive and smiling. And then you knew that everything that was in the fabric of who Daniel was standing right here in front of us. That his family was the embodiment of who he became as a man. And for the first time in like 10 years, it felt like the weight of the world shift off my body. And I could breathe. And that was like such a healing moment for me that like I couldn't even express to his family how much that little interaction in that day changed my life. And that was the start. Like, it wasn't like I was better overnight, but for the first time, I had a glimmer of light in the darkness that told me there was hope for a future, that I could become who I once was. That everything that had happened wasn't just something that I was guilty of, but that it was something I lived through and experienced. It wasn't who I am. It was a part of what I've been through.
It wasn't who I am. It was a part of what I've been through.
I love that.
I love that too. Hey, can I just highlight the obvious, right? You talk about, and Derek confirms, people called into your life, and you're holding this letter for a decade, and you send it, almost calling yourself into the life of Daniel's family, right? Where you can step in and be a piece of his story and be a part of their healing. I just think it's funny how that kind of comes full circle, right? Where you receive the benefit and the blessing of people in your life at the right time, and then down the road as a grown man, you have an opportunity to step into the life of other people and be that for them, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. It was amazing, honestly, because like, not only was it a healing moment, but there was something in that moment that like changed a perspective. And sometimes changing your mindset can be the change that changes everything. And so like, I had always thought about how much pain we would bring to the family by discussing Daniel.
But that was your own narrative, right?
Right.
That was your own script.
And so when we talked to his family, they're like, you guys don't understand that like Daniel was doing what he loved. Daniel was being who he was called to be. And every time you guys talk about a story of Daniel or things that happened with him, you've extended Daniel's life longer than we got to experience it. And through you, we see the man that our son was, or my brother, or, you know, because he had brothers and sisters as well. And to this day, I'm still really close friends with his sister. And I kind of watch out for her, and she has kids. And I think about it every day. That could have been me, and not knowing my children. And I would still trade every day from that to this, to trade places with him if I could.
Wasn't your call, right?
Nope.
Wasn't your place. And there's two times a person dies, right? There's the time we're physically dead, and there's the time that people stop talking about us.
Yeah.
And so I think Daniel Unger lives on, and I think that's beautiful. Hey, to kind of piggyback on Tyler's question, Justin, I'm feeling the vulnerability and the power in you sharing your story and your sorrow and your struggles. And I'm wrestling with this thing. I was in your life, right? Like you were compartmentalizing and you were coming to work and you were doing a job. And I was a man in your life. I guess my question would be, if you could go to that chapter where we worked together, if you could go to that Mike Freeman, what could I have done to help?
To be honest, nothing.
Yeah.
And the reason why is that struggle is so personal that not only would I not have the time spoken of it, like maybe at the best, if I spoke of it at that time, I would tell people that I was in the war. I wouldn't give details of anything that I did, or even oftentimes what my profession was when I was there, because it would start the questions, and the questions would bring me back to living those moments over and over. And so it was easier to be in a state of denial, to not let that avenue of vulnerability come up to where I'd have to think back to those moments over and over again. And
but I think, Tyler, sometimes we struggle as men. We've talked a little bit about this shallowness, right? Let's talk about the Celtics game. Let's talk about Chromebooks on back order, right? Like
everything, what's real in our hearts.
Yeah. And I don't necessarily need, I wouldn't have expected you to let me in, but man, maybe I could have been more mindful and intentional about checking in man to man, right? Just brother to brother. Like I know Derek Anderson from time to time will just throw it out on Facebook, like, "Hey brother, how we doing?" Right?
Yeah.
Just sending it out there.
I think there's a relationship that, you know, I mean, the reality is, like, I talk to people, and you guys talk to people every day, right? And sometimes you're like, man, I wish I could do something for that person, right? Like, you know it, right? You see it, and you're like, I wish there was something I could do that I could just step in and kind of, you know, make things right on some level. But I think that you know, we go through things, we develop relationships with people. That's where we're really able to make an impact, right? When we have that relationship. But one, you know, the other thing too is that, you know, Justin, you've been through some very unique things, right? But there's people that have gone through very similar things to you, and you're the person who's going to be able to make a huge impact in their lives. You know what I mean? Like, you know, sometimes people will tell you, like, hey, you know, this is what I did, and this is how you can get out of that funk, and this is how you can move forward. And you're like, want. You're like, yeah, whatever. You know, you don't get where I'm at.
Yeah.
But when someone can walk up and say, hey, man, I was in that pair of shoes that you walked in, I was in those exact shoes, and I did the exact same thing, and I get it.
And I see it.
And I don't even think there has to be and there doesn't even have to be and here's the way I got out of it. Right. Sometimes it's just, I was there. Right. Yeah. And I think that's a powerful place to be. And what I love about the story that you've told us today is that there's a lot of people that need to hear that someone has gone through the same thing that they've gone through. Right. You know what I mean? Maybe there's not a magic pill that says, hey, if you do A, B, C, and D, you're going to walk out, it's going to be sunny every day. But just to know that, hey, somebody went through it and they're still pushing the ball forward, you know? I think that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
And I think, like, honestly, I'm feeling that calling in my life with all the trials and tribulations that I've went through. I can recognize it in people because my eyes are open to it now, where before I was so caught up in my suffering that I wasn't willing to step into others' lives.
And you know what's interesting, Justin? I hear you talk, and I'm like, I want you in a room full of people telling your story, man.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, like, and regardless of the trauma, right? You've experienced trauma on a lot of different planes, and I think that there's words that you've said today and things that you've said that have been super profound that I think, obviously we want to magnify this in this podcast, but you need to be in a room in front of a room full of people sharing
You need
these
the
things.
podcast.
Needs a podcast. You need a stage. You need a megaphone, my friend.
Right.
It's kind of funny because like you're discussing that right now. Me and Derek have actually talked about this same thing in our process, and that's what got me to reach out to you originally, Mike, was to discuss that, because I think the one thing that like brings me hope in this is that this generation of men that will follow our generation has a chance to be unlocked from our past, because our forefathers were victims of these cycles of trauma the same way we are. World War I and World War II and then Vietnam were extreme conflicts that broke the mold of what tradition in men had once taught.
And those generations put those experiences in a vault and just sat on them, right?
And didn't even maybe have a full understanding of the implications of trauma.
And the value of, you talk about vulnerability, but the value of just sharing, right? And speaking and kind of unloading and looking for that empathetic ear.
Their generation wouldn't have tolerated it.
Right.
That's not what men were supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so I really think that this generation that's following ours has the ability or the opportunity to break that generational curse that we've placed on ourselves. And it brings me great hope to watch. Like, I may differ in my views of masculinity with some of the generation that's following, but I think, I think they're healthier than we've ever been.
Yeah.
That they have the ability to explore who and what they want to become in a way that my generation didn't. Yeah. At least in my childhood, if you cried, it was, I'll give you something to cry for. I will make sure that you're a boy that learns to be locked down in your emotions. And then as we got older, it's easy to be angry with ourselves or guilty with ourselves or ashamed of ourselves when we start feeling those emotions inside, because we were always taught those weren't what boys did.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that, you've got, there's some opportunity here. And I think that these conversations have to be had regardless of the amount of trauma or negative experiences that anyone has had in their life, right? I think that being able to have conversations and connect and have a community of people that you're willing to talk to and you're willing to listen to, I think there's a ton of power.
This is the new definition of rich.
Yep.
Right? This is the new definition of rich, having the ability to do these things. But I just want to go back, if we can, Justin. You may be in someone's ear and they're at bottom, and they're done, and they're having thoughts, right? They're having thoughts of quitting. Talk to them. What would you say to that person?
That's a tough one. That in those darkest moments, there's something to be grateful for. There's some blessing that's waiting for you to step into it, and that things will be better at the end of it. That darkness that we can exist in, where we feel no hope, that we feel like there's no way out. We just need to hang on a little longer, and the blessings will manifest.
Yeah, that light will come, right?
Light will come.
You step into the darkness.
If you're stuck in that darkness and you can't see the way forward, you can see where your next foot steps. and take that step, and then take the next step. And eventually the darkness will reveal the light.
Yeah. I love it, man. I love it. And I love the idea of, Mike, before you asked that question, that question was rattling around in my head, and I'm just thinking like, yeah, what I would tell someone is, sit down with Justin. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I would tell somebody. I mean, honestly, I think that the miracles that you've seen in your life are huge, and I'm grateful that you've decided to hang on and to make changes. Yeah. I love the idea of struggle, but then in the middle of that struggle, I love the idea of being able to self-assess and say, all right, now how do I change? Because what's great about that is a lot of times, right, we find ourselves in a tough spot, and the immediate reaction is, what external things do I need to change in order for the things to be different for me? And that's easy, right? We could change jobs, we could change neighborhoods, we could move, we could whatever. But to be in the middle of the struggle and go, okay, what do I have to change about me to get myself to a better place? Man, that's a tough thing to do, but that's where the change happens, right?
That's the courage that I felt when Justin reached out to me.
Yeah.
Those are the courageous words that I read in his message of like, I'm doing the work.
Yeah.
Right. I'm doing the work. I'm lifting up the hood, and I'm looking at me. I'm looking at my relationships. I'm looking at my faith. I'm looking at, right, my role as a man, as a father. And I think that that's that 5 times, 10 times magnification mirror, right? And that's scary sometimes.
Yeah.
There was a Bible verse, I think it's in John, and it says that the good that a man does is from the goodness he holds in his heart, but the evil that a man does is from the evil he holds in his heart. And that spoke volumes to me, in that the things that like can torment you and the things that you feel the guilt and the shame over, you give them a place of power in your life. And fear is probably the overwhelming thing that I've let dictate my life. And so when I finally decided to make this journey, I can't even pinpoint what it was. I think it was my wife that made me want to be a better man. And I made a pledge to myself at some moment where I was like, everything I'm doing is coming from a place of fear. So what can I do in my life that would make the biggest difference? And that's that if I'm most afraid of it, that's what I need to confront. And so stepping into fear has become like kind of the mantra for me. If I'm afraid of it, that's where I need to go. And
whoa.
As you're saying that, like, what's bouncing in my head is 2 Timothy, right? For God hath not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Mm-hmm. I love what you're saying. And I just think that it's inspiring to me. I haven't experienced the things that you've experienced, Justin, but as you're talking, I'm thinking, man, there's some things that I could purge, some things that I could move in order to gain momentum in the right direction.
Yeah. Well, so we've mentioned some Bible verses. Can we talk a little bit, Justin, where are you at with faith and faith overcome? I mean, you've thrown out some scary things that people struggle with, right? Shame, guilt, fear, trauma. How is faith helping you handle these things?
So to me, faith has helped me get through everything, because when my understanding fails, that's when faith begins. It's that when I don't have the strength and I don't have the understanding of the why or the how or the who, something will guide me through it. And faith has been a big part of that. Like, since I've started reaffirming, my relationship with God, the breakthroughs in my life have been ginormous. I mean, to say the least. Like, they're not always the changes we want. Like, and they can be hard, and they can hurt your heart almost as much as stepping into the next part of your life. But it helped me see the poverty mindset in which I've lived my life. So I'm 45 now. And before
youngin', he's a youngin'.
Yeah,
before
man.
I turned 45, I had never even considered what happiness meant. Like, that was just not a part of my life. That wasn't a thought process. I had never thought that I would live past 30 with the life I was living. I'd already been stabbed. I've been blown up. I've been run over. I've been beaten to an inch of my life multiple times. I didn't have hope, and I didn't think I would be alive past 30. So when I got to 30, it's like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? I don't have a path forward. I don't know what to do. And so I've had no examples of what that looked like. So I've had to start to figure that out. And I'm successful in my life, but when I would be with people that were also successful, I felt like the lesser of the two. I didn't feel equal to the people that I was in presence with, because I didn't have worthiness in myself. And that comes from that poverty mindset. Like, I was always that kid. And one of the things I've recognized in my life is that I'm still that little scared kid who put up walls and never found the light on the other side of those walls. So now I'm tearing those walls down and looking at that child and saying, who are you and what do you need to become healthy and get past this wall? And in that process, that's where faith has came in. Like, God, I feel like, has helped me walk through that path of fear. You are worthy, you are loved, you are enough. And those are things that I didn't necessarily get confirmation of in my life through relationship, through family, through the people who were supposed to protect me when I wasn't able to protect myself. I feel like God has always been there walking that walk with me. And that I fight in great comfort, because even when I'm alone or I don't understand what's going on in life, I have that consolation that I'm not alone.
Hey, Justin, what do you do now to honor your parents?
Whew,
it's a commandment, right?
It is a good question. I think I'm allowing myself forgiveness for them and who they are. For the longest time, I was so bitter in that what they didn't provide for me and the burdens they've placed on my life, because my parents became my first children. Every home I've ever lived, they've moved into, and I had to help them through life. So I had a lot of hurts from that relationship. And I think I'm finally starting to be able to stop seeing them as a source of my pain and start to see that they were just people doing the best they can, and celebrating what they did teach me. You know, maybe they didn't teach me how to do this or how to do that, but they also gave me an example of what not to. And I owe them a debt of gratitude in that, because that's probably what's made me so driven to be successful, to not do the things that, like, I could have succumbed to. You know, I could have did drugs. I could have, been violent. I could have been a criminal. I could have done all the things that I grew up with, but I didn't. So there's some moral and ethical things they taught me that's made me who I am. And I have to recognize that they're part of that journey. They're part of that process, and that I owe them, because maybe they weren't the parents I wanted, or the parents that, like, most people have, but they were present. They were there. Maybe not in the best ways, but they were always there.
Yeah. Who do you honor today as you stand where you stand in your life? Looking back, is there anyone? I mean, you've mentioned some amazing folks, right? You've mentioned your children, and you've mentioned Mario Smith and Daniel Unger and his family and Sandra. So is there anyone else that you'd like to take some time in this moment to honor?
I would have to say it would probably be my grandma. my Nana, actually. So she's not my blood grandma, but she was my grandma before I was born. And she's the one person who never let me get away with crap.
What's her name?
Her name is Sue. And she was a very hard woman and a very different type of woman. Like, she was a anesthesiologist, but she had served in the Air Force. And I think she was one of the ones that, like, of all my family that served in the military, she was one of the few that actually encouraged it. She prepared me for my military journey. Like, in her home, when we would visit, she actually had a cabinet for each person. And in the cabinet, there was a template, and the template showed you how you're supposed to arrange your toothbrush and your comb and your soap. And you had to fold your shirts and your underwear, and they had to be in a specific order.
I need that for my kids' rooms, man.
Yeah.
Right.
So when I stepped into the military, they're like, how do you know how to do all this? And I was like, my grandma showed me. This is how it had to be. They're like, she's a genius.
Oh, Nana, man, she had it figured out.
And we're like, with my dad, he would, beat me, like, when I would do stuff wrong. Like, I knew that was coming, and I would often provoke it because pain was temporary and I could deal with pain. So, like, when I would get those types of discipline, I would be like, just get it over with so I can go do what I want to do. And my Nana was probably the first person that recognized that stubbornness in me. And she's like, I'm not gonna discipline you with pain. I'm gonna educate you. And she would always make me take this collegiate dictionary that was like 6.5 inches thick, and it had little tiny writing. And when I did something wrong, I would have to transcribe the pages with the abbreviations, the definitions, the punctuation, everything. And to this day, I still have a lump on my right hand from all the writing, because it was never allowed to be written on a computer. It was always handwritten. And so in that, like, that really challenged me. It challenged my mind. It challenged my patience, and it made me sit through something that was hard, and also increased my vocabulary quite exponentially.
Yeah, that's awesome, man.
That was the punishment that I dreaded. Like, that was the thing I was afraid of. She was the first person to teach me healthy fear.
Yeah.
And in that, she also showed me love in a way that I hadn't had. She was a source of structure, even if it was in brief moments that, like, my chaotic life hadn't had. She was the first person that taught me that people could care about you and make an effort in your life.
Man.
Justin, what gives you hope these days?
That my kids will live a better, healthier life than I lived. That they can be not just like good people, but they can be emotionally healthy in the relationships that they'll get to carry on in their lives.
How old are they now?
So my daughter is 25. My son, Jaden, is 21. And my youngest, Honor, is 10.
Man, that's so awesome, man. So awesome.
I didn't really mention him much, so I just want to throw him out there real quick.
Yeah.
My son,
he's going to listen. You better.
My son, Honor, is like a blessing to me, because a lot of the time that I missed with my children is truly a pain of my life that I'll live with. And so getting my son to be able to see some of those moments that I missed with my daughter and my older son, I got to relive those moments, and I got to be more of the man who I was before the war than the man I became after. And they say that God gives you what you need. And apparently I needed a stubborn, ornery, along with myself to teach me what I probably put my parents through.
I love it, man. Well, Justin, first of all, this has been so much fun, and I just appreciate, you've mentioned vulnerability multiple times in our time together, and I appreciate your vulnerability. I appreciate your story. I appreciate the life that you lived and the service that you gave, and I appreciate the life that you're living now. It's miraculous, and I'm grateful that I get to spend a little bit of time with you and get to know you. This podcast is interesting because we talk to people from all different walks of life. They've had all different kinds of experiences, and everybody gets asked the same question, and you don't get off the hook, Justin, either. But I think that I could probably guess some of the things that are important to you. But what does it mean to you, Justin, to be considered the richest man in town?
I think for me, it's been to know that, like, no matter what we go through in life, that there's always redemption around the corner if we put in the effort and we put in the work. That relationships that have been damaged, hurts that have happened or occurred can be healed, and that we can become a more complete and better version of ourselves.
Man, I love that answer.
Around the corner.
I love that answer so much, man. I absolutely love it. I tell you what, I can't tell you enough how grateful I am for your words today. And if there's anything and that this platform can do to help get your message out there, any way that Mike and I can help and do that, we're all in, man. We're all in on Justin.
Yeah, I'm out of room on my paper for notes, Justin, but I know there's more, right? I know there's more. Yeah. We're going to be doing this again, but I want to let you know that I see you, right? I hear you, and I validate you. And if we can, I echo Tyler's sentiment. If we can do anything to help your story land in people's ears and hearts, and so that they might feel that redemption around the corner, right? But that redemption meaning that we are of value, and that maybe, yeah, we've gone through some things, but that the things we've gone through do not diminish our value, right? And
interestingly,
we're
Mike,
worthy, we're loved, and we're enough.
Right? The things we've gone through increase our value, right? Isn't that an interesting thing, right? We go through the things that when we're in them, it feels like it's wearing us away. But when we get to the other side of them, there's the opportunity to be greater than what we were. And I'm telling you, Justin, and
imagine though, if you attacked every day with that mindset, yeah. Hey, the things I'm going to go through today will add value to my life.
Yeah, man,
it won't diminish it.
Redemption's around the corner, man. I love it, and I'm grateful for you, Justin. And look out, we want you back, man. It was a ton of fun.
Screen your phone calls, man. Screen your phone calls. I'm gonna give a shout out to Derek Anderson as well for making that connection. I'm so glad that he's in your life and you guys are strengthening each other. Tyler and I are always talking iron sharpens iron, and guys getting together in a faith-based approach and just sharpening each other and helping each other through this. We're not getting through this thing alone. We're just not.
Yeah. And I have to give Derek a shout out too. Like, I had a calling in me to get baptized, and Derek put it together in a day or two to get that with an intimate circle. And so I've actually been baptized twice now through this. We did one small ceremony with our faith-based group called Coffee and Jesus.
That's awesome.
We did it there, and it was super meaningful because I needed it. I wanted that to be part of my new life, to acknowledge God and make that choice of my own volition And then Saturday or Sunday, I just got baptized in front of the entire church.
Last Sunday.
Yes, on Easter.
Congratulations, man.
Congratulations.
What a day.
Congratulations. I just want to highlight a couple of times in our time together, you've said, I vowed to myself. I promised to myself. And I love that we're wrapping up our time together talking about that ordinance of baptism, because that's what that is.
Yeah.
Right? That is an outward expression of an inner commitment. And now we just keep our promises, right?
Yep.
Keep our promises.
I love it, man. Well, hey, look, this episode, we'll dedicate this one to Daniel Unger, right?
Yeah.
And the man that he was, and the friend that you are, to all the people that you're teaching along your path, Justin. I appreciate you. Keep doing what you're doing, and we'll bring this back together soon. This party always keeps going at some point, right? We appreciate you, man. Have a great night.
All right.
Good idea, Ernie. A toast to my big brother George, the richest man in town.